and then we're going to sit down and we are going to negotiate.
Going to be not too many questions answered.
Senators, earlier after the passage of the Continuing Appropriations Act of 2014, it's now the House's turn. We take you there live here on C-SPAN.
To the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on October 16, 2013 at 8:59 p.m. that the Senate passed with amendments H.R. 2775. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Good evening, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure have until 5 p.m. on Monday, October 21, 2013, to file a report to accompany H.R. 3080.
Objection? So ordered. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that it be in order at any time to take from the Speaker's table H.R. 2775 with the Senate amendments thereto, and to consider in the House without intervention of any point of order a single motion offered by the Chair of the Committee on Appropriations or his designee that the House concur in the Senate amendments, that the Senate amendments and the motion be considered as read, that the motion be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the Chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Appropriations, and that the previous question be considered as order on the motion to its adoption without intervening motion or demand for the division of the question.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object, Madam Speaker.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I wanted to advise my colleagues that we support this request on this side of the aisle, and with that I withdraw my reservation.
The reservation is withdrawn. Without objection, so ordered. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to the previous order of the House, I call up the bill, H.R. 2775, with the Senate amendments thereto, and I have a motion at the desk.
The clerk will report the title of the bill, designate the Senate amendments, and designate the motion.
H.R. 2775, an act to condition the provision of premium and cost-sharing subsidies under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act upon a certification that a program to verify household income and other qualifications for such subsidies is operational and for other purposes. Senate amendments. Motion offered by Mr. Rogers of Kentucky.
Pursuant to the order of the House of today, the motion shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Rogers, and the gentlelady from New York, Mrs. Lowy, will control each 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the further consideration of H.R. 2775.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
And I rise today to present H.R. 2775. This legislation will raise the nation's debt ceiling to avoid default, reopen the doors of the federal government, and end this unfortunate shutdown. The legislation before us are Senate amendments to H.R. 2775. The Senate has just passed this bill, and now it's up to the House to send it to the President for his signature. It's the product of a final agreement between Republicans and Democrats to help put us back on stable ground with an open government and without the threat of default, as we look to find a long-term comprehensive solution to our multitude of fiscal problems. First and foremost, it provides critical funding for operating the federal government at the current annual rate of $986 billion through January 15th of next year to end the government shutdown. The resolution includes a limited number of non-controversial or technical changes called anomalies. Many have already been passed by the House and the Senate. A few are new, such as provisions to ensure the smooth reopening of the government, to provide due compensation for federal employees and other funding for shutdown costs, to provide funding for the FAA to continue current operations without interruption, and so on. These have been included to prevent irrevocable harm to vital government programs, to continue critical services, and to ensure good governance. To be clear, Madam Speaker, the CR portion of this resolution is virtually clean and is essentially identical to the legislation I introduced in the House in early September. Secondly, this legislation will increase the debt limit until February 7 of next year. By extending our borrowing ability, these amendments will avoid the damage a default would cause to our recovering economy, to businesses large and small, and to our people who desperately need a stable economy and continued job growth. Lastly, the resolution before us will help protect against fraud and abuse by requiring income verifications for individuals seeking subsidies under the Obamacare Act. Essentially, this bill before us tonight allows us to move on. It deals with the nation's immediate short-term problem, allows time for Congress to address the broader picture, what the real drivers of our debt are, how we can keep from reaching the debt limit in the future, and how we avoid staggering from fiscal crisis to fiscal crisis. After 2 long weeks, it's time to end the government shutdown. It's time to take the threat of default off the table. It's time to restore some sanity to this place. To do this, we've all got to give a little. Clearly, no one on either side has received everything they wanted. But I believe that now we all should act for the greater needs of our nation. If we want to get anywhere, we must be willing to negotiate, and we should be willing to put partisanship aside and govern for the greater good. The House must realize it is just 1/2 of 1/3 of this government, and that no laws can be made without the consent of the Senate and the President, just as they can't act without us. We must also acknowledge that the profligate spending and borrowing that's driving us into unsustainable debt and hurting this nation and the people who call home. I'm optimistic that once this resolution is passed, the House and the Senate will come together in a budget conference to work out our broad fiscal and budgetary challenges. It's my hope that a common top-line discretionary number for fiscal year 2014 will be established that will allow Congress to enact full-year appropriations bills and avoid shutdowns like this in the future. And it's also my hope that Congress can address head-on the problem of unsustainable growth in our mandatory and entitlement programs and work to reform our overly complicated, growth-stifling tax code. The resolution before us will buy us some time to accomplish this must-do list and will ensure that our people have access to the critical government services they rely on in the meantime. We must take actions that will help restore the people's confidence in their elected officials and in the economic future of this nation. We must. The sooner we pass this resolution, the sooner we can move on to the many tasks before us that the people have sent us here to work on. I yield back. I reserve.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
I yield myself as much time as me.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, 15 days after the shutdown began, the House is finally considering a bill to reopen the government and avoid the economic calamity that could have ensued if the United States defaulted on its debt. Frankly, it's disappointing that Republicans have dangerously put our economy and American families at such great risk. 800,000 federal workers have been furloughed. Families that depend on critical services from disaster aid to nutrition assistance have been left in the cold. Billions in economic activity has been lost. Fitch Ratings placed the United States of America, on, quote, rating watch negative, end quote, due to political brinksmanship. Despite clear opposition from the American people, many Republicans, it's hard to believe, are still poised to oppose this short-term bill tonight to reopen government, pay America's bills, and negotiate a reasonable budget agreement for 2014. Congress, let's remember, has already enacted $2.5 trillion deficit reduction measures since 2010. Looming across the board, sequester cuts threaten all our priorities, from job creation to Head Start to military readiness and everything in between. For example, if we do not act before January 15th, defense spending will be cut by approximately $20 billion below 2013 levels, and we could jeopardize up to 1.6 million American jobs over the next year. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, we cannot meet these serious challenges without a spirit of bipartisanship and a commitment to working together in good faith. I urge the majority to learn the lesson of this irresponsible shutdown. Do not allow the fringe in your party, those disconnected from reality and whose sole goal is obstruction, to continue to dictate the agenda of this House. No member of this esteemed body should ever again threaten the full faith and credit of the United States of America or shut down the government to advance a reckless ideological agenda. I strongly support this bill tonight with hope that my colleagues in the majority will work in a bipartisan way to avoid a repeat of this tragic episode when the funding and debt ceiling deadlines in this bill are reached in the new year. And I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time, and the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to a very hard-working member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Dent of Pennsylvania.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise tonight in support of the Senate compromise legislation being considered to end this unnecessary government shutdown and futile exercise in brinksmanship. This legislation reopens the government and prevents a catastrophic default and credit downgrade that would have spurred another recession. I'm genuinely pleased that cooler heads have finally prevailed. However, it is very disappointing that we're in this situation, that after more than 2 weeks of a government shutdown and on the eve of default on our nation's obligations, we have finally reached an agreement. This legislation must be supported, but it should not be celebrated. No high fives or spiking of the football. It is a temporary government funding bill and a short-term debt limit increase. It's not a win for anyone, particularly the institution of Congress or the presidency for that matter. The bill represents the conclusion of a difficult period from which I hope that many can draw important lessons. I hope that this sad episode will result in a newfound commitment and intensity for the governing majority in Congress to make the difficult decisions that must be made to keep the government functioning while addressing the many problems facing our country, including the budget deficit, the nation's out-of-control debt, and the many challenges presented by the health care law or Obamacare. For many months, and particularly throughout the last 2 weeks, I've worked tirelessly with colleagues from both sides of the aisle and in both chambers to find an agreement to break the impasse. I particularly want to thank Representative Ron Kind, Senators Susan Collins and Joe Manchin, and the many other members who participated in the many discussions. I believe these conversations have laid a strong foundation that we can build on to arrive at agreements on many of the major issues that need to be addressed in this country. I urge my colleagues not only to vote in favor of this legislation tonight, but to join with those of us who share an affirmative obligation to govern and who seek bipartisan solutions to the challenges facing our great nation. At this time, I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Pennsylvania, member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Fatah.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to urge expedited passage of this legislation. I join with the chairman and the ranking member of my committee, and I agree with every word that has been stated by the majority chairman and the ranking member. This is critically important. On this Monday, I was in a foreign country. I was in the state of Israel, met with the president and with a whole group of brain researchers from around the world. They had difficulty understanding, given our nation's leadership on so many critical issues, that we could be in a paralyzed situation. So I'm happy that the Senate has acted in such an overwhelming way on this matter with some 81 bipartisan votes, and I would urge the House to act, and I know we will, to restore our government, to pay our bills, and to get on with our responsibilities as the most powerful nation in the world, the wealthiest country in the world. We can pay our bills, and we can conduct the affairs of government in a way that gains us respect around the world rather than befuddlement. Thank you very much.
The gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished member of Appropriations, Ms. Barbara Lee from California.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, and let me thank the gentlelady for yielding and just say I rise in support of this bipartisan budget deal. By voting in favor of this bill tonight, we will finally shut down this awful government shutdown. While I am pleased that common sense and cooler heads have finally prevailed, make no mistake, this unnecessary shutdown has caused real pain for millions of innocent families. Never again should the American people be taken hostage to a political agenda. This is wholly unacceptable, and these tactics must be rejected once and for all. Now, I hope that tomorrow people can begin to put their lives back together, go back to work, and provide the government services that our veterans and our seniors and our children so deserve. While I am pleased that this deal will reopen the government and pay our bills, much more work needs to be done. The temporary spending level of $986 billion keeps sequester-level cuts in place that are hurting our economy, children, seniors, workers, and communities across this nation. So I hope that as we move forward, we will understand that we need to protect vital programs that make for a functioning government so everyone can have the opportunity to climb, strive, and reap the rewards and security of the American dream.
The gentlelady from New York reserves, and the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the former chairman of the Financial Services Committee of the House, gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Backus.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman. For one night, let us talk about what is good for this country and not about the other party, because it's going to take both parties to solve our problems. As Chairman Emeritus of the Financial Services Committee, I am very aware of the direct connection between a strong dollar and a vibrant economy so necessary to create jobs. And that's what we need for America, jobs. The U.S. dollar is the reserve currency of the world. Globally, the dollar and U.S. Treasuries are two of the most preferred safe haven investments. Their reserve status has been a benefit and blessing to all of us economically. It has traditionally brought this country good jobs and a higher standard of living. However, the dollar is under attack today. Out-of-control spending, unless addressed, will become more and more of a threat to the strong dollar and our currency. It will continue to erode our economy and cost jobs. However, two wrongs don't make a right. A default would further weaken the dollar, destroy jobs, and be a self-inflicted wound I am not willing to deliver. Therefore, I will be voting yes on this bipartisan agreement and urge my colleagues to do the same.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 1 minute to distinguished member of the Appropriations Committee, Ms. Capter from Ohio.
The gentlewoman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank Ranking Member Lowy for yielding me time, and I rise in support of the Senate's bipartisan compromise to end the government shutdown, reopen the government, avert a debt default, and pay our bills to spur economic growth and job creation in this country. This compromise today is what the American people expect of us. They are tired of the partisan bickering and the economic uncertainty that the deadlock has created. The biggest challenge facing our country is creating growth to help to balance the budget. We can start by coming together on a budget agreement. So let's restore regular order. Let the Budget Committee go back to work. Let the Ways and Means Committee go back to work. Let the Appropriations Committee go back to work under regular order, not just continuing resolutions. And let us move our bills in regular order and not govern from manufactured crisis to manufactured crisis. I will vote for this evening. It is the best we could get under the circumstances, but it is far less than we are capable of. I yield back my remaining time, and I thank the gentlelady again for yielding.
The gentlelady from New York reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky reserves, so the gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to a distinguished member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Serrano from New York.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute. Without objection.
I thank the gentlewoman. I will strongly support this bill tonight because it not only opens our government, but it makes us meet our obligations in a proper way. But if we walk away from this tonight not having learned the lesson, this would have all been a futile exercise. The lesson that we have to learn is that we can't become obsessed with one issue and close down a government over one issue. When a bill becomes a law and gets signed by a president and gets judged on and approved by the Supreme Court, that's the law of the land, and we have to abide by that. We should in no way continue to act as if things really didn't happen, only what is happening now happened. And secondly, we need to understand that there are no winners or losers tonight. The real losers are only the American people who had to put up with this situation for these weeks. If we go away tonight not learning that lesson, that we cannot allow that to happen again, it would have been a waste of time. And so I hope that we move ahead on the Budget Committee, that we move ahead on that conference, that we move ahead in a joint way, in a two-party system, to work on behalf of the American people. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Neal.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentlelady. Madam Speaker, this vote has been portrayed about an opportunity for new spending. The difficulty with that argument is that this is really an argument about paying our bills and for debts incurred. This vote tonight is a vote about paying for the war in Iraq, which I oppose but still believe it has to be paid for. The former majority leader of this House said at a critical moment that having a tax cut in a time of war was patriotic. You know what's patriotic? Paying for those veterans' hospitals, whether you were for the war or against the war. Those wars were put on the credit card, and it's our responsibility to pay for them. And that's what this debate is about tonight. Not the opportunity for new expenditure, not a debate over social program spending in the future. It is simply a vote to pay for bills that have been currently incurred. To have shut this government down was not only wrongful, but the decent people across this country who were hurt by this irresponsible manner of conduct in this House remains reprehensible. And tonight, we're going to have a chance to reopen this government and vote on paying our bills.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
How many? Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Mr. Scott, Georgia.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I certainly rise to support this very needed legislation. Let me make a point here that there is a very important part of this legislation which sets up the Budget Commission. And I would just like to make an appeal to that commission to not only get to us a good budget by December 15th, but take some time to see how we can get some mechanisms in place to prevent us from ever again shutting down the federal government. We take a solemn oath here to defend the federal government, to support the federal government, to uphold the federal government, and we must honor that. Maybe we can do mandatory arbitration in its place, but we've got some smart people in this place. We hurt too many people when we shut down the federal government. And let us, hopefully, we can put that Mitch McConnell rule in place. God bless that senator from Kentucky and the courage that he had to step forward in a bipartisan way so that we can put that mechanism in place so that we will never again put our good faith and credit at risk in this country. And finally, let us Democrats and Republicans work together beginning tonight and pass this bill.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for leading. I quote, "The fact that we are here today to debate raising America's debt limit is a sign of leadership failure. It's a sign the U.S. government cannot pay its own bills. It's a sign that we depend on financial assistance from foreign countries to finance our government's reckless fiscal policies. Money that we have borrowed from Social Security Trust Fund, borrowed from China, borrowed from Japan, borrowed from the American taxpayers. The rising debt is a hidden domestic enemy, robbing our cities and states of critical investments in infrastructure like bridges, ports, and levees, robbing our families and our children of critical investments in education and health care reform, robbing our seniors of retirement and health security they have counted on. Every dollar we pay in interest is a dollar that is not going to investment in America's priorities. Increasing America's debt weakens us domestically and internationally. Washington is shifting the burden of bad choices onto the backs of our children and our grandchildren. Americans deserve better. Driving up our national debt is irresponsible. It's unpatriotic. The words of Senator Barack Obama in 2006 and in 2008. Madam Speaker, what was irresponsible and unpatriotic is all of a sudden responsible conduct? I think not. We should be talking about cutting spending before we start raising America's debt ceiling. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
I am delighted, Madam Speaker, to yield 1 minute to the distinguished leader from California. Where is she? Madam Pelosi.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentlelady for yielding and for her great leadership as our ranking member on the Appropriations Committee, and for bringing us together this evening, as we have been all along, 200 House Democratic members, 200 strong, in support of the Republican number that we are voting on today. Tonight, the unnecessary shutdown America has been enduring for 16 days comes to an end. Thank you, Speaker Boehner, for finally allowing a majority of House members to reopen government and avoid a default that would have clearly wreaked havoc on our economic credibility and the stability of our country. It is equally clear that the shutdown has already shaken some pillars of our economic security and growth. It has jeopardized our credit rating, slowed our GDP growth by 0.6%. It has eroded consumer and investor confidence in our economy while taking $24 billion out of our economy. My colleagues, do you think that your recklessness was worth $24 billion to our economy? This recklessness is a luxury the American people cannot afford. Tomorrow, we can finally begin what Democrats have been waiting for 7 months to do. Tomorrow, we can go to the negotiating table to debate a budget to create jobs, 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 that four-letter word, expand the economy, strengthen the middle class, and reduce the deficit in a meaningful way. Tomorrow, we must stop governing from manufactured crisis to manufactured crisis and start working to find solutions so that we never again see a day when the government has been shut down and the full faith and credit of the United States of America has been called into question. For that reason, I urge a yes vote on this bill, not on its merits, because as we know, this number is too low. Even the chairman of the committee has said it's an unrealistic and ill-conceived number and must be brought to an end. This number, if left in effect, would cost us hundreds of thousands of jobs in the months ahead, in the next year. Hundreds of thousands of jobs. Again, a number that is a luxury this country cannot afford. So if the Republican number is key to reopening the doors of government and restoring confidence in our economy, Democrats are willing to accept this resolution tonight. But as I say, not because of its merits. Not because of its merits. We do so because a vote yes on this bill will take us, hopefully, not on its merits, but in the hope that it will start us down a path to grow the economy, promote the prosperity of every American who is willing to work hard, play by the rules, and to achieve the American dream. And so with those qualifications as to what we are voting for tonight, the number doesn't meet the needs of the American people. The length of time that the debt ceiling is extended is not long enough. But apparently that's the best we can do, and I commend Senator Reid for working in a bipartisan way to send us this bill tonight so that we can bring this sadness to an end and how it has affected so many people. So again, not on its merits. I do not come here to pin a rose on this legislation. It does not have that respect, but it does have my support as a means to an end. And with that, I urge a yes vote and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from New York reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Madam Speaker, might I inquire of my colleague if she has further speakers? Are you prepared to yield back then?
I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I urge passage of the bill and yield back my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky yields back the balance of his time. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to the order of the House of today, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion by the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Rogers. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and without objection, the motion. Does the gentlelady ask for the yeas and nays?
I ask for a recorded vote.
The yeas and
nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on adoption of the motion will be followed by a 5-minute vote on approval of the journal if ordered. This is a 15-minute vote.
I'm ready. The House came in at about 9:20 Eastern, debated about a half an hour or so. The measure passed in the U.S. Senate this evening, which would fund the federal government through January the 15th. It would extend the Treasury Department's borrowing authority through February 7th. It would allow the Treasury Secretary to continue to take extraordinary measures to avoid default. It would require those receiving health care law subsidies to have income verification, and it would finally set up a meeting of the budget committees in the House and Senate, a bicameral committee to work out the longer-term budget issues. And we understand a breakfast meeting will happen tomorrow between the chairman and ranking members of both the House and Senate Budget Committees. President Obama will also speak tomorrow morning, 10:35 Eastern, on the passage in the Senate and the likely passage in the U.S. House. There are currently 432 members of the House, which means that it would take about 217 if all were present and voting for the measure to pass tonight. However, there are two Democrats who are missing this evening, Carolyn McCarthy and Bobby Rush of Illinois, both out on medical issues. That brings the level down to the number to 430. So a number of reporters are saying that the number needed to pass this evening would be 216. We expect this to be the last vote of the week in the House, and we will watch the vote here on C-SPAN.
On this vote, the yeas are 285, the nays are 144. The motion is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal, which the Chair will put de novo. The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the Journal stands approved.